jump into the chat. Let us know where you're joining from. We're on opposite ends of the US here. We got Linda, Seattle, I'm Chicago. So would love to hear where all of you are joining us from. And feel free to drop a fun fact if you like to. We love to learn about who's here in the audience. And Linda, we're going to introduce you in a second, but thank you so much for coming on and being part of this event for Women in Sales.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And it's incredible to be able to, connect with the community. And I consider myself a seller at heart. And so I am also a woman in sales.
Absolutely. Exactly. And we're going to talk about that because I don't think people realize that you never really get to escape sales. If you decide to become a CEO yourself, you're still going to be in sales. So for better, for worse, it's always going to be with us.
Absolutely. I've always told, everyone who asks me for advice, like, what is the number one most important skill set to develop? And I would say sales.
Yes, absolutely. Well, good. Well, we are going to get started here, and then folks will just continue to trickle in and join us. But again, thank you for everyone who's here. We're super excited about today's conversation. First and foremost, my name is Alexine Mudawar. I am CEO of Women in Sales. We are the largest global community for women in the field of sales, and we provide resources, educational materials, events, webinars, workshops, anything you can think of that is going to better serve women in their sales career. We work to provide it. And we also offer a free community to thousands of women across the globe so they have access and there are no financial barriers to them. And I am joined here with Linda from Common Room, and they are a current Women in Sales partner company, which we love. So they are part of the reason we are able to offer our memberships completely free of charge to all of those thousands of women. So Linda, can you introduce yourself and Common Room, please?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Linda, CEO and co-founder of Common Room. We are an AI-powered go-to-market platform that gives revenue-generating teams a single place to capture every single buying signal, prioritized at the person and account level, and then run AI-native high-converting plays at scale. We have the privilege of servicing, the elite sales teams at organizations like Atlassian and Twilio and Grammarly and Notion and Rippling. Generally, our users are, SDRs and AEs, even sometimes CSMs, all in the service of pipeline generation. So, we exist to help you hit your number. And it's been an incredible journey building Common Room over the last 5 years, especially with kind of the emergence of Gen AI and everything that's happening in RevTech today. So I'm super excited to be able to be here and talk about the founder journey and more about AI and sales and all the opportunities that we see in front of us today.
Amazing. We're so happy to have you. I was just talking to Linda behind the scenes, and we were talking a lot about how important and critical it is for us to see more women in these leadership roles. So one of our goals at Women in Sales is to continue to find women leaders and executives to continue to showcase and share their stories so that many of you who are looking to move into executive leadership roles down the road have a roadmap to look up to. So with that said, I feel like a really natural starting point would be with the early days. Obviously, I see you on LinkedIn all the time, and I'm like, she's cool. She's this like awesome boss, CEO, co-founder, and I love hearing those stories of today. But I think going back to those early days is really critical too. So, how did you first get your start in tech in general?
Yeah, my career has absolutely not been vertical. It's had twists and turns. And if you look at, my LinkedIn profile, very much a horizontal path. And so for anyone who thinks that, it's important to have this kind of vertical career, like I'm here to say, it is not necessary. I think for me, I actually started my career in finance. I was a investment banker at Morgan Stanley. Man, there was no creativity, right? You're basically like 100 hours a week, Excel and PowerPoint mule. But I think it's important to take the positives of every single place that you've experienced and every single job you've had. I think the formative experience for me there was just learning the power of hard work, putting in the hours. And, I think it also helped that I was a 20 something year old in a room with executives while I never really contributed much, I think hearing the way that they talked about business and business strategy was formative for me. I think some of the best sellers in the world are those who can connect, the customer value, but ultimately, ladder that up to the ultimate business initiatives and business pain of that organization. So I think for me, that was a really important learning moment in kind of my journey as a seller. I think another formative moment in my career was, I had been in finance. I was building all these Excel spreadsheets, very much kind of like a behind the scenes, behind the spreadsheet kind of role. And I had been doing that for, almost a decade. And like, I always just had this innate need or desire to be in the trenches, to be on the front line, to really go and be at the source of engaging with customers. And so I had an opportunity to do that, to go lead product marketing, which is a little bit closer to sales, at AWS, Amazon Web Services, which, if folks are familiar with it, is one of the biggest cloud infrastructure providers. It was the heyday of, developer tools and the massive explosion. And so I kind of got to like ride a rocket ship at a large company and really get great training on, what go to market at scale looks like. I think for me, that was actually one of the moments that led me to go and quit Amazon and start Common Room, because we were building these incredible tools for developers that were intelligent, that were data driven, that had trigger based, signal based actioning. And then I would go into CRM and see, notes that were 5 years old left by some sales rep of a past gone era. And so for me, it was really like, wow, like I became super passionate. Like, how can we bring all of these incredible advancements that have come to technology, and how can we help sellers do more, and sell better, and how can we really make sales technology enabled? And so I left Amazon to start Common Room 5 years ago now. And our vision from day zero has never changed. We want to transform how organizations engage with people, and we want to, help go to market teams do the best job that they possibly can and achieve more with AI.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, and it's so interesting. I know AWS is one of those companies that I feel like so many of us would absolutely love to work at. It's one of those companies that's like a marquee in our field. So, what other, I guess, from that experience when you were at AWS, what were some of the things that you took with you? What stayed with you since you've moved on, this 5 years later?
Yeah, so many learnings. I mean, I think one is just like no job is too big or too small. Just roll up your sleeves and make it happen, which is actually one of our 4 company values today, which is make it happen. I think I was shocked by just the level of grunt work, manual things that needed to happen. And a lot of my days were spent, I would upload logos into the CMS to like make the website. But I realized that, all of that was critical to ultimately what we were trying to achieve as a business. And so I think the second learning, apart from just like roll up your sleeves and make it happen by hook or crook, right? Outcomes oriented, all those things that are so important in sales. I think the second thing I learned was like, always kind of put your work in the perspective of the broader business goals. I think it gives meaning to the work when it's really, really hard, but it also helps you kind of have an ownership mindset that's not just about your number or like your deals, but also like, what does your team care about? What does your leadership care about? And having that kind of empathy, I think, helped me operate more strategically and help me kind of find my path. In a world where, I think it was a bit of like a hot mess sometimes.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's so critical what you share about like as an owner, you're not just, I think your mindset is so important because I think a lot of people think, okay, I'll become a CEO and then I can be hands off. Like the business just kind of runs itself. And as you know, as I know, that doesn't work that way. You do still have to be part of all these things. And I know when I first started my business, I wanted to kind of suffer through and learn every single aspect of the business before putting it on someone else's plate. And I think if you have that mentality, it's just such a better way. You'll understand, you have a better appreciation for if you do end up hiring someone into that role. If you force yourself to learn marketing or learn IT on some level, like that is a very painful growth process. But then you take that with you and it changes the way that you lead later on. So I think that's such a huge takeaway for the folks that are here today.
Yeah, and it's like you always have to be reminded of that sometimes because when you do step away and you're like, oh wait, gotta really get into the details. I was actually hanging out in Vegas at a AI conference with May Habib, who's also an incredible female CEO and founder of Writer, and I was sharing notes with her, and one of the things that she said that even struck me was she was like, okay, like I was like, what's the key to your success? Because they're doing amazing. And she was like, you got to be in the details. And I was like, the details of what? And she just looks at me. She goes, everything. And I was like, oh man, okay. And it was another reminder moment for me to go back and say, what have I not been in the details of? Let me go look and see, which is one of the leadership principles that Airbnb has as an example, right? They ask all of their leaders to be able to go look and see, and it means diving really deep and getting into the details. And so no matter if you're like a one-person startup or you're a solopreneur or if you're a massive scaled organization like Airbnb, I think that never goes away.
Absolutely. So many good lessons already. I'm excited to dig even deeper into here. I think this is the part of our conversation I'm most excited about because I just went through my CEO transition, a few years ago. You and I were almost on like a similar timeline. But obviously you took it. We were just talking about this in a different direction. You ended up hiring and building out a whole team. I went the solopreneur route. So I think it's going to be really interesting to hear some of the major lessons learned. So as you transitioned into CEO and over these last few years, what were some of those major lessons? I'm very curious to hear and compare notes.
Yeah. I think it's like a constant practice. I wouldn't by any stretch of the imagination say I'm a finished product. But I think, some of the major lessons for me were, of course, like staying close to the metal, diving into the details, staying super close to customers, like those things you can never really get too far away from. I think another one that I learned early on that has served us super well is like, ultimately for building a venture backed startup where VCs have incredibly lofty expectations, ultimately, you got to win as a team. So we're all in this together is another one of our core company values. And for me, it means hiring, doing the work myself, but then ultimately realizing, hey, I actually need to hire someone who's way better at marketing than me, or doing sales myself and being like, you know what, I actually don't have the experience to scale up an enterprise sales team. Let me go find the best in the world at this. Let me learn from them, and let me try to hire that experience. And so, just almost like having zero ego and realizing that you don't know what you don't know, and being really open to other people's suggestions and advice and ideas. I think being someone who always, felt like I knew best, that was definitely a moment for me. It's like, be open. Like, who cares if their advice doesn't resonate with you or you feel like you're being explained to by somebody? Like, take what resonates and leave what doesn't. And almost have a very impersonal approach to learning, I think has been a huge unlock. I think the third thing that I'm still working on is just how do you lead with inspiration versus micromanaging and leading with, anxiety and control. I think in stressful times, one of my overused muscles is just to like go start doing it myself, or, start to really start, you could call it micromanaging. And how do you really give context to your teams about why something's important and bring people along? I think has always been, something that I need to continue to work on.
Yeah. Such good insights. I definitely think when you were talking about knowing when to hire, this is so critical. So I think there's this old school mindset of like, I'm the CEO, I'm the best salesperson at the company, I'm the best marketer at the company. You can't be everything. It's not possible. And that's why that's the beauty of surrounding yourself with people who are experts. I think it was like Steve Jobs who would always like hire people who are better than him and better at what they did. And I think having that ability and being able to kind of set aside your ego and acknowledge that, I think that's such a beautiful thing, because I do worry so much for people who are just starting out on their entrepreneurial journey. There's this assumption, specifically on the sales. I feel like I see it most in sales, but probably because that's where I have the most proximity. But it's like, I'm CEO, I am the best salesperson, I know how to run everything in sales. And the reality is, like, every motion in sales looks different, every segment, every like deal cycle is going to be different. If you change products, how do you price out SKUs? There are people who are absolutely experts in those things, and some of those are not going to be you. So I think it's amazing that you have that foresight and are able to kind of lead with that. And I love also what you said about, you know, leading, you know, not with that anxiety and fear stricken, you know, the approach, because so many of us kind of grew up with that in tech, and it did drive results. But what we saw is it also drove a lot of burnout, and it didn't drive longevity and keeping people on your teams. So I think that's such a great leadership skill for you as well.
Yeah, I mean, what you said made me think of another one, which I'm sure you'll really resonate with, which is like, you start with a vision and you're going to need to adjust because the macro changes, you know, the world changes, people change. And I think that agility, or just being like, hey, I know I'm going west, but on the path west, like, it's gonna be a little bit like this. You know, it's not gonna be this straight like shot journey. I think that's also a huge learning. It's like, you got to be agile, and you
Yes.
know, part of like your ability to lead is actually to like close the gap between how fast the world moves and like where your strategy needs to be.
God, well said. Yeah, very well said. Yeah, these are great. I mean, there's so many lessons. I'm sure you, maybe one day you will write a book of all these lessons and share them out. But on the flip side, I know the other side of this question that's always very, very interesting to folks is the challenges. And you and I were talking a little bit about this. When you go and look across LinkedIn, you see all the success stories. You see the people who are like, I quit my 9 to 5, and the next day I made my first million by 7 a.m. And so there's all these like high, you know, like stakes kind of like wins that get shared. You don't really hear about the mundane. You don't hear about the challenges. You don't hear about a lot of those stories. And I think those are so critical as people explore if they even want to go and become a CEO. So can you share a bit about the biggest challenges that you and other CEOs face? And you already kind of alluded to this, but also in the lens of tech continuing to evolve and you know, shifts in economic factors, everything that's happening at the moment right now.
Yeah, if folks have heard of Instagram reality, I am here to tell you LinkedIn reality is a very real thing. um, you know, for me, it was mind blowing because there used to be the CEO of a very well known brand who was very active on LinkedIn. And I got to, you know, connect with him and share notes. And I was like, I think your content's amazing. Like, how do you pump that out every day? And you still have a day job, like, teach me your secrets. And he was like, oh yeah, I'll teach you my secrets. Like, I have like 3 ghostwriters. And I was like, what? I had never imagined that that could be. I mean, I was very naive. And so, you know, whatever you see on LinkedIn, LinkedIn is a distribution channel. It is, for many corporate brands and CEOs, a big marketing channel. It is, I'm not saying that that content isn't well thought through, that it isn't authentic, that, you know, it isn't valid. But at the end of the day, a lot of people do have a lot of help with crafting all of that content and messages. And of course, you know, I think if you read Mark Benioff's book, one of his entire chapters is dedicated to this concept of like, always present success. Like, success is the best sales tool. And, you know, success really is the best sales tool. And so, you know, I think one of my biggest learnings on starting to get more active on LinkedIn was like, it was really intimidating for me at first. I didn't have a brand as of maybe 18 months ago. I decided to invest in it because I believed that it would be good for our business. And I wanted to share all the incredible things we were learning from our customers and the cutting edge technology we were building for sales teams. And I think that desire outweighed the awkwardness of screaming out into the void. But the way that I got started was I actually just studied posts that worked well and I broke it down into very tactical and less intimidating tidbits, which is like, hey, I think I can post once a week about building company topics, like, building in public and sharing what it's like to be a founder. I followed a bunch of people that were, top voices in the space, and I started engaging with their content because I saw that, I needed to join the conversation and be a part of it. I started posting about our new product releases and making sure that every time we shipped a new compelling feature, I started posting about it. And so that consistency and kind of breaking it down into like, I can do this, like I can do these things. Over time, it's like, oh, wow, all of a sudden, right? You have this followership, you have distribution, you have a brand. I think what seemed really intimidating in the beginning was being like, oh, I need to build a brand. Like that's very intimidating. But if you can kind of parse it down into very tactical action items that you believe are possible, it becomes less intimidating. And so that's kind of ultimately how I approached it. But yes, like, at the end of the day, like, don't look at other people's success on LinkedIn as something to compare your reality to. Every single founder who's ever had a candid and transparent conversation with me has a lot of challenges that they are dealing with.
100%. Yeah. And I think it's so interesting because I think there's this almost reframe. And I don't know if you went through this. This was like a big developmental moment for me. This reframe of what a challenge is or like what a loss is. And what ended up happening, and I really struggled with this year one, was every time something bad happened, I felt like it was happening to me personally. And it felt like a personal attack. Like it would just be like, Slack issue, something broke down in a tech stack, whatever. And I was like, they did that to me, Slack to, or whatever it was. And so it's so interesting because somewhere around like that 1.5 to 2 years, then I started to realize every single time something's gone bad or not my way or has hit me with something I didn't understand, something really good happened on the other side of that. I had to learn a new platform. I had to troubleshoot. And then I became an expert on some random tool that is now part of our tech stack. And so it's really interesting because I find that that's a really critical part of this journey too, is reframing what is a challenge and should we be fearful of them? Because I do try to do a good job on LinkedIn of at least once a month sharing some type of challenge, sharing something that I'm going through or something that I'm working on. And without hesitation, every single time I get a couple DMs that are like, I'm so sorry. And I'm like, sorry for what? No, I'm just talking through a challenge. And so I think I think the beauty of so many CEOs and leaders is that's just comes with the package. We have to learn how to face those challenges. We have to learn how to take those and turn them into something that's productive and useful. So it's really cool to hear some of those stories and also just to hear about your journey building a personal brand, because I think a lot of people also see that as you just flipped a switch on social and just started posting, but you had a system behind it. You had a process. You had these things that you had to do in order to get there. It wasn't just like a random Tuesday that you just did a post and then it popped off and then now you're like a sales influencer. It's something that you worked on and worked towards.
Yeah, and I'll actually give you the inside scoop. My board like staged an intervention. They like ambushed me and they're like, you really need to like get out on LinkedIn. Like it's critical. So I didn't have much of a choice, but it wasn't my natural orientation for sure. But on your note, Alexine, I want to highlight like two like lessons that have really stayed with me. So the first is Brian Halligan, who's the CEO of HubSpot. He has this incredible post on LinkedIn about learnings from building HubSpot. And one of the things that he says in there is he's like, from the outside, obviously HubSpot seems like a up and to the right, like rocket ship success story. And it is, right? And he's like, but from the inside, There was never a customer that unlocked something huge. There was never a partnership that changed the trajectory of our company. There was never a single hire that somehow, magically unlocked things that didn't exist. It was always a two-step back forward, one step back. Like it was always two steps forward, one step back. You win two steps, something else happens, you move back one step. And he's like, but it's the consistency of just plugging away at it that ultimately, compounds over time. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. It's two steps forward, one step back. The other piece is, Jeff Weiner, he was the CEO, but now he's the exec chairman of LinkedIn. He was one of our early investors, and I got to do a bunch of sessions with him as just my exec coach. And at the time, he would say the exact same thing that you mentioned, which is I would take everything so personally. And he was like, you are not common room. Like, I know it feels that way right now, but you need to like separate whatever failures that common room get, like negative feedback or unhappy customers or your product not being something people want. Like this is in the early days, from like you as a person. And I think that's really hard. Like to your point, sometimes it just takes some time. Like it takes some years and then you kind of, get out of that.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. We just completed our first retreat of the year. We have our second retreat coming up. And it's funny because our head of events actually interjected in and created a feedback form. And she's like, I am going to do the first pass at looking through the feedback form. And then we will have a separate meeting and then we will talk about it together. But yeah, it is really tough. And I absolutely struggle in that area, still separating the two. And if someone has like a bad experience or whatever it is, I definitely personalize those things. So I think that's just something so important to talk about. And especially in those early days, it's really hard to pull apart the two worlds, the two identities, and it does feel very intertwined. And so I think that's such a good call out, an area that I'm absolutely continuing to work on. And my goal is the next retreat, I'm on the feedback form and I will take the feedback directly this time. So the little
it's definitely probably your superpower too, right? And it's probably why you've been able to build this.
Yeah, I hope so. But the TLDR of all of this is, regardless, you make it to the CEO role, you're not done. Like the work continues. There are always challenges, things that you have to continue to iterate to get better at. It's great to have also those folks in your corner, like the Jeffs of the world, where you can get that feedback and have someone that you are good having them check you. I absolutely have people like that in my corner where they will call me on stuff. And like, I've had that even in the past week or two. And they're like, hey, this is the third time you brought this up, either solve it or move on from it. And I'm like, wow, that was, and so it's good to have those people. It's really critical as a CEO, because if you have a bunch of yes people around you, it doesn't benefit anyone. It doesn't benefit you. It doesn't benefit the business. So I think that's fantastic.
Totally. A lot of times people are like, this common room's your baby. And I always say, no, it's not my baby, because babies are precious and nothing is precious here. Like, I really agree with that. It's like, you want the truth, right?
Yeah, gosh, wow, that's awesome. I like that saying too. That is really great. And then that way nobody can, the old phrase, like don't call people's baby ugly. You're like, it's not my baby. So
Exactly.
and then we can fix those things.
Yeah.
But okay, so we're gonna shift gears. We're gonna move into what is the talk of the town right now. Everybody's talking about AI. Everywhere you go on LinkedIn, in person, conferences, everyone is talking about AI. You cannot get away from it. What's your take on the AI product innovation war? What are your thoughts on AI in general right now?
Yeah, I mean, at a very macro level, like I've been talking to CEOs and CXOs, and selling is harder than ever before, right? And a lot of that is because of the AI innovation war. Like organizations are shipping AI functionality and new products at warp speed. One of our customers, Datadog, they have like 30 product SKUs and they're shipping more to keep up with the AI arms race. And I think that's putting a lot of pressure from what we see on sales teams, right? You're asked to learn a really complex, buying group against a backdrop of reduced budgets. And now you're being asked to, be experts in AI and all of the new innovations. And so, I think part of our core philosophy is really making it simple for sales to leverage AI to generate more pipe and close more deals. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about, hey, we know that the power of AI lies in the inputs. We know that data is ultimately what drives AI, but let's not overwhelm sellers with data, right? Let's go and find the signal and the noise. Let's unify and leverage all the cutting edge AI to go and hunt down all the incredible prospect signals that have historically been locked up into 1,000 different tools or out in the webosphere, but very manual to go and collect. Let's unify that, but let's abstract away the challenges of sifting through all of that to really hand sellers like the hot, juicy leads on a silver platter. I think there's so many incredible opportunities along those dimensions, though, in that it's like, imagine the old world of spelunking through LinkedIn Sales Nav and Zoom Info and home built dashboards to just try to cobble together a view of which accounts and which leads you should focus on any given day. You got black box intent providers that tell you somebody somewhere Googled some keyword that isn't helpful to you at all. I think the power of AI for sales is really just simplifying that workflow, right? A single home, a single dashboard where you're going to go in and see, hey, out of all the things that happened in the last 24 hours, the digital breadcrumbs that your prospects are leaving everywhere, online, offline, how can you aggregate that into a view where it says, hey, this account is surging because a bunch of people have been hitting your pricing page, or go reach out to this lead because you've been outbounding into this account for a very long time and somebody just followed your LinkedIn page that works at that account, right? Or, hey, you have an executive buyer who used to leverage your software. Well, they just changed jobs into a new role. And we know that, 70% of any executive buyer's budget gets spent the first 6 months of a new job. That's not a cold outbound. That's a warm outbound. Go and reach out now and reestablish that relationship. So I think for me, it's like the opportunity for AI, for pipeline generation, specifically for sales to, get meetings with the right people at the right time with the right message is really about data, but it's about, making that data incredibly actionable and being almost those bionic arms for sales reps. We don't necessarily have a philosophy that we're all going to be replaced by agents. I think that world seems very far off, and the reality is we don't see any of our customers getting rid of their sales teams for an agent. Everybody is hiring more sellers right now, right? It may be a reduced headcount plan, but they are increasing their teams. Like our customer Rippling, has 150 SDRs and they're planning to hire 100 more this year. And how do you do that without technology that lets you be more efficient and streamlined? We just published a case study with Vivan, which is a great AI sales startup, but their CMO, Gerald Green, he was able to actually boost pipeline using Common Room by 40% with 50% less of a team of headcount. Yeah. And he says, I want my SDRs to work smarter, not harder. And I want my SDRs, even if it's half the size of what I was originally going to hire, I want that entire team to hit their number. And I think that's really the opportunity here. So it's been incredible to kind of see the hard ROI results that are starting to emerge. I think with AI for sales, at the end of the day, we're here to generate pipe, we're here to close deals and hit our number. And that is exactly, the types of results that we want to generate for our customers.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is, what you were talking about, the ability to aggregate all this information is so interesting because we moved into this era where I can't even imagine, like when I was first starting in sales, almost 15 years ago, like the idea of like clicking a button and being able to see all of those insights. Like I was during that phase where we were just calling into companies through the main line and transferring, and my Salesforce notes would literally just say like, press 2, then press 1, then press, like literally I would just have these like long biographical, like notes in Salesforce I was notorious for. And so it's crazy to think like those insights, like that was all stuff I would put into my notes in Salesforce. Now you can get at a click of a button. At the same time, that was also the era where we were just strictly looking at numbers of like productivity. Like, okay, so we're saying that, or numbers versus productivity rather, where we're saying, okay, I did 150 cold calls a day, which used to be a goal of ours when I first started. We try to hit 150 to 175 cold calls a day, which is crazy. And you're manually doing that. And then now we're moving into this era where we're much more productivity focused. I'm very pleasantly surprised and happy to see companies moving back towards like, hey, we actually want our teams to hit quota. And I think that is so important because sellers want to win, they want to succeed. And so we had this weird era of like 5 to 7 years where like there was a celebration if like 30% of the team hit quota. And I was like, how did we get there? Like, that's not really a win. Like, your sellers want to hit. So either you hire better, you change something, those are off. So I think this new era with AI is so critical. I also see, and I'm sure you see this too, and you already talked about this a little bit, for sellers, it's overwhelming as well because there's so many tools. There's just such a vast array of tools available at all times. It can be overwhelming. And when you're charged with selling and you have these huge quotas, you don't have the time to learn like 16 new tools in your tech stack. So I think, tools like Common Room are great where you can almost aggregate what would have been a couple other tools just a few years ago. Now it's like, okay, this is one less thing you have to worry about. Just consolidate it into here, use this, do your research here, keep it moving, get your list delivered to you. I mean, that's incredible. That is really like the phase of sales that I'm here for. So
absolutely. I mean, it's even just hearing, your initial experience, it's changed so much, like from single channel, like you call the main line, to like now, I mean, it's incredibly omni-channel. It's 24/7. There's online, offline. There's like 1,000 channels, right? And so how do you actually keep tabs on all of those various places where your prospects could be engaging with you, I think is a massive challenge. And part of why a bunch of these like siloed tools sprang up. I think the other thing that you mentioned that's so interesting is you're clearly like the best of the best when it comes to Salesforce hygiene. Like, you clearly entered in all your notes.
yeah.
But the reality is, like, when our customers scale their organizations to 100 reps, 550 reps, like Atlassian, Salesforce hygiene becomes a critical issue.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the biggest opportunities for AI is to actually bypass needing to rely on manual data entry as the source or system of record. So earlier this week, we launched our integration with Gong transcripts. And one of the biggest use cases is like reps are really bad at putting close loss into Salesforce. They're also really bad at like entering the full buyer committee, right? You get like 18 people to come to a demo and like no rep has the time to go and manually, I mean, that's just not what sellers do. Like, sellers are there to sell, to build customer relationships, to consult. They're not meant to be manual data entry people, but they've kind of been forced into that, right? But with something like the ability to ingest Gong transcripts, you can now actually use natural language understanding and LLMs to say, hey, this should be a closed loss because the executive buyer on the call said that they don't have budget right now, or they said that, they're looking at competitors, or the timing isn't right. And you can actually bring those insights in a structured way to generate a lead list. Like, here's your closed loss lead list of, every opportunity that we've heard about from Gong that you don't even remember because this was 6 months ago. And by the way, here's that executive buyer that you should go reach out to now. And so that ability to actually not have to rely on Salesforce hygiene to be able to run intelligent plays is like something that I'm super excited about with respect to like opportunities for AI. It's like showing us what we don't already know and letting us not have to rely on, the errors of human, data entry, and unlocking the ability for sellers to go and focus more on what they do best.
Yeah. Oh, Rena said trigger tracking. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. We call that signal-based, actions, but it's exactly the same concept.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so much. I feel like we could stay on AI for a long time. I'm curious. There's a few areas on AI that I want to dig into a little bit more. And it's the question that everybody's thinking, which is, big predictions for where we're headed next, where you think like the next evolution of AI is. And then in tandem with this, also the AI SDR. Like we're starting to hear some people are talking about AI SDRs, a lot of people aren't yet. So just as you're thinking about like future thinking, future state, would love to hear about just AI in general and then also AI SDRs.
Yeah, I think at a very high level, this is a year for hard ROI with AI, right? You've heard about so many different AI sales tools. Proof is in the pudding. Our role in this is we're building case studies right now with industry leading sales teams like at Notion and Grammarly and Twilio to tell the story of how we impacted that team's performance, their attainment, and also the business. And so we're really excited to kind of have these real live like case studies with huge teams coming out in the next quarter or so. I think the second piece of it is AI SDR is, let's just call it like, it is a motion. Like there's no good or bad when it comes to motions. It's just whether or not it fits your business, your needs, and the needs of your team. I'll give an example. So this concept of AI SDR for us means leveraging all of our signals, all of our identity and waterfall enrichment capabilities to generate really high converting personalized messages at the right time that will convert. I call it one-to-one personalization at scale, right? So now, like Alexine, let's say you have a book of 100 accounts, like based on those, to your point, Rena, triggers that signify the right timing from the right person. Can we send a message on your behalf that will convert? Where we're seeing most organizations like Twilio leveraging AI SDR is really, again, against that backdrop of letting humans focus on the things humans do best. So there we're taking 150 reps. And because Twilio, if you can look at their 10K or listening to their earnings call, they have a big business objective right now around sales efficiency, moving humans to work on the hard problems of building relationships with more strategic upmarket accounts. But they still care about, the long tail. They still care about small organizations. And so we're actually removing those 150 reps from owning any account with less than 100 employees. So removing them from needing to own the long tail. And we're doing full AI SDR solutions for that long tail. I think another area where one use case for AI SDR is let's go get humans doing what humans do best. Let's use AI to actually support them in that endeavor. I think another big use case for AI SDR that we've seen is where speed to lead is really important and it's much more of a transactional outreach. So as an example, if an executive buyer hits your pricing page, that's a very late in the funnel intent signal. And we find that speed to lead is super important here where, immediately you're like, hey, I've seen you hit the pricing page a couple times. Like our pricing can be confusing. Can I talk you through what it is? That's a pretty transactional, like the customer has a question. They're clearly expressing intent. You reach out really, really fast with an offer to be consultative. We found that some prospects have been delighted by this. They're like, wow, like you're anticipating my need before I even reach out to sales. And then at the same time, like that automation makes it so that seller is able to kind of be there when that moment happens. And so that's another area where we've seen like huge ROI from kind of AI SDR solutions. And, that meeting shows up on the rep's calendar. They're not, I don't know, sitting in some weird tool trying to fish for website visits all day. So it's kind of a win-win for both the prospect and the rep.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the next year and a half is going to be very interesting. I'm like, just kind of watch.
What's your prediction?
I don't even know. I feel like so much has changed in the last year. I think there was a big fear that I was hearing a lot about behind the scenes, which is like all sales teams are going to get eliminated. We both know that wasn't going to happen. And we know that not to be true. I think what you shared is really interesting around the use case of like taking a segment and offloading that to AI SDRs. That gets interesting because especially if it's something that's like maybe the more like highly transactional, that's always been my assumption is that I came from enterprise. So I knew it was ingrained in me. The enterprise isn't going anywhere. It's not possible to like offload an enterprise sale with where AI is today to a non-human. It's just not, with the complexity, the number of stakeholders, the buy, like you can handle parts of the research and the process, but not the actual sales cycle. Whereas I have always felt that we're heading more towards where some of the transactional sales and transactional sellers will unfortunately be moved over to AI. And I think it's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it's an interesting business decision. And then I also think it gives an opportunity for some of these folks to also consider, like, are there other segments I can work in? Is there something that's higher ticket that I can focus on? But I feel very strongly that that's where we're headed to. I'll just be curious to see which segments companies pass off. If it's just like I think that was really interesting, where it's like 100 employees or less, or is it like 10 million and less in ARR, whatever it is. I think that's going to be interesting to see how companies allocate and what they decide is the threshold. So I could definitely see that coming. And I also think, this is my dark horse prediction, there are so many tech tools right now that I think we're going to see some major consolidation in the next like 18 months ish across some of the, like, and this happens at like every few years anyway, cyclically in our field. But I do think we're going to see another round of like consolidations happen because sellers are overwhelmed. So I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think some companies are going to get acquired. I think some companies will make out with some great amounts of money that if they get pulled into larger companies. But I do think that we're kind of overdue for that because there are way too many scattered tools right now, and it's so overwhelming for sellers.
Totally. Almost every single one of our customers that has sales teams of over 100 have done these surveys where reps say that over 70% of their week is spent on non-selling activities, tool overwhelm, where, you know, in organizations of some of our customers, reps are being asked to learn and find data in 8 to 11 different tools on a daily basis. And so imagine trying to ramp up on all that and learn the technology and learn the buyer committee and learn, you know, all these things. And outbound is only getting harder, right? So something's got to give. I think that's why, you know, we focus so much on kind of being an all-in-one, trying to simplify all of that experience for sellers, trying to hand, you know, the leads and the reasons why on a silver platter. And again, I think that's really where technology can, you know, make a difference, not in the relationship building and the sales cycle, which ultimately, you know, rests on us humans.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And I think just watching even like common rooms advancements over the past year has been fascinating as well, because just seeing, you know, like all of these different points at which we can connect. And your team was really one of the first teams I saw starting to talk about using multiple signals, because yeah, I feel like the signals conversation started to happen a few years ago. That wasn't something that was like just in the last year by any means. And also marketing is probably like scratching their head because they've been having that conversation for like a decade plus. So they're like, okay, sales just caught on. But I feel like your team was one of the first teams that really started to talk about like, how do we leverage multiple signals and tie those together? So it's not just like, hey, Linda, I saw you got a new job. Want to take a demo? Like it's not powerful enough as a standalone. And so I think that has been a really powerful insight. And a lot of sellers are realizing, okay, like the ante has been upped. Like we have to start to look at multiple signals and figure out a way to connect the dots somehow to get a foot in the door with these companies. So I anticipate that's going to continue. And I think even the signal, like where even just a few years ago, if I sent a cold email and I was like, hey, I just saw that you moved into this role and you used to be a customer of ours, that used to catch someone's attention. Now that's like table stakes. They know. They're like, I just got that insight from LinkedIn or wherever. So I think that's going to be really interesting to watch. And I'm excited to see your teams already on the forefront of that.
Yeah, I'll give you two very specific examples around that job change play. One play we found, one signal stack we found a lot of success with is like a compelling news event of the company's like compelling moment coupled with a job change play. Like, hey, I saw you just joined as VP of Product of Canada, and you know I saw in the news that Tim Hortons is announced a big expansion into Canada, as an example. Another one is hiring. So, hey, I saw that you just joined as the demand gen marketer of Nike. I know that Nike's got a job opening for 300 sales reps. wow, like you're going to have a lot of work on your hands generating pipe for all those sales reps. Like,
Mhm.
so that's the concept of signal stacking, to your point. And it's actually pretty incredible that LLMs and Gen AI can create that message for you.
Yeah, it's gonna be incredible to watch. Like it's we joked today even about like the videos and like where we're at today with like, but look how much even in this past year AI has evolved to where I don't know why I have a Facebook anymore, but I still do, and I see the like people are fooled by what I feel like is still very obvious AI videos, but there's like a vast amount of the population that doesn't realize that's AI yet. That is gonna really continue into this year and next and into the future too. So I imagine the same thing for messaging. It's going to become almost innocuous. Like you won't even realize that a human being didn't necessarily craft that. It's just so I think it's going to be interesting to watch. But as we move towards, which is crazy, I feel like the time has flown. We only have 9 minutes left, which is wild.
Wow.
I think I have two questions I want to end on because I think these are a good kind of closing point for us. But I know we have some aspiring future CEOs in the audience today. Some are going to watch this later on. Some are going to be watching this live with us today. What advice would you offer them? What skills do you think are absolutely necessary if they want to go down this same path and become a CEO?
Wow. I think, okay, so being a woman CEO, I think it's easy, and I'm sure there's mostly women in the audience. I think it's easy to think that you're at a natural disadvantage, and honestly, you probably are. But the reality is, like, every single human has such an interesting path, and you have strengths and, weaknesses that are so unique to you. Lean into whatever your strength is. Like, whether it's, you have an existing network in a space, or, you have a unique insight because of your unique experience, or, don't forget that being a CEO or being an entrepreneur or doing anything of that sort will be hard, whether you're a woman or not a woman. Really examine what makes you unique, be confident in that, and lean into it and start there. It'll always be easier than, trying to start somewhere where you don't have knowledge, or you don't have a competency, or like, you don't have a network. For me, like, I have many disadvantages, but I think some of my biggest advantages were like, I knew developer stuff. I was at Amazon Web Services. I had a big network of marketing leaders who went to a bunch of developer companies. And that's actually where Common Room got its roots. Like, our first persona that tested our product and used it was developer relations.
Oh,
um,
interesting. Okay.
yeah. And so my first customers, would be folks at companies like Mongo or Snowflake, but it was not demand gen and it was not SDR, but it helped us kind of get a foot in the door. And so, I think it's like, again, it's never going to be a perfect linear journey. So lean into your own strengths, and, try to lean into what makes you special.
Yeah, I love it. That's uh great advice here. We did get a question in the Q&A that's kind of interesting. Are you down to take one question
Yeah,
before
of
my next
course.
question? It's from Rena. So thank you, Rena. You've been very engaged in the chat, and she's a dear friend of Women in Sales. She asks, what is the most unforgettable connection request or cold DM or cold message you've gotten that made you say, okay, whoever this is, I need to give them my time? Do you have any like stories that come to
Ooh,
mind for that?
yeah. The first sales rep that we ever hired, his name is Josh Gross. And man, I think he DM'd me a couple times, but every single time, like, he would go into our Slack community, he would try our product, and every time he DM'd me, I was like, wow, like, this guy should work here. Like, he was already doing the job, right? And I think that's really hard to ignore. It's just like that targeted, like, personalized, but like, you're doing work, like, you're really thinking about the problem, you're like designing an interview loop for yourself. Like, it was impossible to not pick up the phone. I'll say though that, some of my most formative relationships have started from my cold outbound. So my co-founders, I have three, two in engineering, one in design. I cold outbounded to them on LinkedIn.
Oh, funny. Okay. Prospected them. Wow.
Yeah, and they ignored my first message, as people do when you get a random cold outbound message. But persistence paid off. I would literally update them on my progress, even though they weren't responding. And I would say, "Hey, I really think we should talk. You have such a great background." And eventually, they gave me 30 minutes, and you get the door to open, you walk through the door. But that was through cold outbounding on LinkedIn. I'll share another one. So I actually got my job in venture capital through cold outbounding on LinkedIn as well. His name is David Rosenthal. He's since left the VC world to be the host of a very popular tech podcast called Acquired. But he was the first person to say, "I'm going to write a check and invest in your company," and that was through cold outbounding. So some of the closest relationships I have in my life today from a career standpoint have come through a really personalized cold outbound message and the tenacity of pinging them multiple times. So
Yeah.
don't give up.
Absolutely. Such good lessons. I was like chuckling when you were talking about that, the board, because when I was job seeking like years ago, and I didn't necessarily, there were companies I wanted to be at, but I didn't have any connection to them. So I went and started reaching out to all their board members, and then I got board member introductions. And so all of a sudden, when I went to interview at these companies, they were like, "Our board member recommended you." I'm like, "I've never
That's
met them.
amazing.
I've never spoken to them." I just sent them like a buy. I was like, "I'm gonna ghostwrite the message for you. Can you send this to your sales leader?" And it like skipped 3 steps in every interview. It was like the funniest thing. So yeah, never underestimate the power of a cold message that's well crafted and well researched, because people want to help where they can, but only if you make it easy for them. So I think that is a great lesson. And last question, rapid fire here, is what are your sources of inspiration that you go to as a CEO or you look to in your life?
Oh, wow. At work, it's always customers. If I feel like I've lost the way, I want to talk to customers, whether it's positive or negative feedback. That is what kind of gets me up in the morning. It's also my team, the brilliant ideas, the incredible things that they're building. Outside of work, it's my family, my husband, my pets who keep me grounded, nature, right? Like actually unplugging and feeling like there's a bigger world out there outside of tech, and that as much as sometimes the news cycles and all the turmoil make us feel like we're on a roller coaster, how lucky and privileged we are to get to do what we do. So those are the things that I try to center around. And then it's always like, and people undersell this, I think, but it's like sleep well, work out,
Yes.
eat healthy. I really try that to like focus on that sometimes, because yeah, it's easy to let all that go, and that just makes everything worse.
Yeah, it catches up with you. It always finds a way. I very much a sleep avoider for a long time. It will catch up to you. So yeah, very good advice. Excellent. Everything you shared here today was awesome, Linda. Thank you for giving us a glimpse behind the curtain. We don't always get to see this side of CEOs and hear the honest journey and the challenges and the good and the bad. And so thank you for sharing with us. For anybody who's here today or watching this after the event ends, we are including a link in here to Common Room so you can learn more about Common Room. This is our Women in Sales link too, so they'll know you're coming from us. And I also included a link in the chat to the Women in Sales Slack community. We'll continue conversations there. We have a bunch of different channels between prospecting and messaging and knowledge sharing. So you can continue to ask questions there if you'd like. And lastly, thank you so much, Linda, for coming on, for being part of this, for being a partner to Women in Sales as well. Because again, in order for us to provide free memberships, it means that other companies have to invest into our community and allow us to continue to scale. So thank you, Common Room. Thank you, Linda, for being here today.
Thank you so much. And connect with me on LinkedIn. I talk about a lot of this stuff.
Yes, absolutely. All right, we'll see everyone at the next event.
Bye.